About 10 days ago, I stumbled upon a devastating truth. My wife of 6 years had been caught on camera at a friend's bachelorette party, engaging with two male dancers. This scandalous event was secretly filmed by another woman at the party using her cell phone. She later confided in her boyfriend, who coincidentally knew me. We weren't friends by any stretch, but we did share a few acquaintances from high school. His girlfriend had warned him not to reveal the video or share it with anyone, and they managed to keep it hidden for all these years. This guy and I have never seen eye to eye, just occasionally bumping into each other due to our mutual connections. After he and his girlfriend split, he started showing the video to his buddies for laughs. It became a recurring joke at their gatherings, meetings, or guys' nights out, purely for their amusement. Many of the women in the video were in relationships at the time, which made the whole situation even more twisted. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were mocking me and the other guys, though I knew that might just be my insecurity talking. The story never reached me or any of my close friends until about a month ago. One of our mutual friends met this guy for a drink, and the conversation somehow shifted to the infamous video. He started joking about how his ex-girlfriend had recorded a wild bachelorette party, including two dancers getting intimate with one of the women, my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife. This guy had trust issues and kept a close eye on his girlfriend back then, so she recorded everything to prove her innocence. She even involved her friends to show her then-boyfriend that she was the virtuous one. Our mutual friend recounted that during this incident, all the women, including the one with the camera, went backstage into the dancers' dressing room. My girlfriend was the only one who went all out. While others performed oral sex and flashed, she took on both dancers at the same time in their dressing room. She was being intimate with both dancers while the other woman secretly recorded. About a month ago, my friend learned about this and felt compelled to tell me. He wrestled with the decision because he knew about my happy marriage and our deep bond, especially since we have two young daughters, aged 3 and 5. 11 days ago, on a Friday, my friend reached out saying he needed to talk about something important. His tone suggested it was serious. I thought it might be some personal issue he needed help with. Over the years, our friendship, which began in high school, had been all about mutual support. The next day, we met at a bar, and I noticed he was already there when I arrived. His anxious demeanor made it clear that something was troubling him, and I had a gut feeling it was related to me. I grew up in a tough neighborhood and have had my share of run-ins with the law due to my crew activities. I'm a big guy, 6'3", and my past gave me a certain reputation. But that's all behind me now. Among my peers, I've always been seen as a natural leader. During my teenage years, I was aggressive and got into many fistfights. However, after a couple of prison stints, getting married and having kids, I've changed. It's been over 8 years since I last got into trouble. I'm more composed and mature now, with 2 kids and a stable job as a union electrician. One of my friends has been close to me since high school. I used to protect him from bullies as he's a year younger. Now, at 29, with a decent corporate job, our social circles rarely overlap. When I sat down at the bar, I could tell from his body language that what he had to say was about me. It made me anxious, so I asked how he was doing and what was bothering him. He said what he was about to tell me might seriously impact my relationship with my wife, but he felt I needed to know. He didn't want me to discover years later that he had kept something from me. I told him to just spill it. Then he dropped the bombshell. A few weeks ago, while hanging out with friends, someone showed him a video from about 5 years ago. It showed my wife involved with 2 dancers in a dressing room. Hearing this, I was overwhelmed with emotions, anger, confusion, and shame all at once. I wanted to believe it was a prank, but deep down, I knew it was true. It was 5 years ago when my wife casually mentioned she'd be attending a friend's bachelorette party. At the time, we had been dating exclusively for about 7 months, but hadn't moved in together yet. Coming from a traditional Irish Catholic family, she was exceptionally beautiful, and I was deeply in love with her. My initial reaction was to protect her honor and reputation. In the past, the old me might have confronted my friend aggressively for even hinting at such a scandal. Perhaps that's why our mutual acquaintance didn't inform me earlier, knowing I had a history of rage. When I asked my friend if he had the video, he said it was on his friend's phone, and that he had only seen part of it. I doubted him because who only watches part of a video like that? Nevertheless, that detail didn't matter. I realized my friend wouldn't bring me here just to mess with me about something this serious. It would be too risky considering my temper. So, I asked how I could contact the guy with the video, and my friend said he could set something up. When I requested the guy's phone number, my friend stepped outside to make a call. We went outside together, and upon returning, he told me the guy wasn't answering, but had sent a text. My friend assured me he'd keep me updated once he got a response. At that moment, I wanted to leave the bar and immediately call my wife, but my friend advised me to take some time to think things through before doing anything rash. So I decided to stay and talk about my relationship with my wife, which had been wonderful up to that point. I never expected her to be involved in something like this. During the first year of our dating, she showed a bit of a wild streak, but I had no idea it was this wild. After that first year, it seemed like she had left her party phase behind. However, she does change when she drinks. When we started dating, she was still in that party phase, but that's no excuse because we were committed when she attended that bachelorette party. Like any relationship, ours had its ups and downs. Her issues with alcohol were a problem at one point, but she got them under control, mainly because of our first daughter. While I was talking to my friend, he received a text from the guy and said he could share his number with me. I immediately called the guy and asked if we could meet so he could give me the video on a flash drive. He told me he was out of town and would be back next week. I expressed my interest in getting a copy of the video and asked how much he wanted in exchange for deleting it from his phone and any other storage. I hoped he'd delete it willingly, but he demanded $11,500. This was one of the reasons I never liked him. I negotiated it down to $11,000. There was no reason for him to hold on to this video. My wife and his ex-girlfriend were no longer friends, and his ex-girlfriend likely wouldn't care. I think he was just being a jerk. However, I was glad he asked for money, because it allowed us to create a legal agreement preventing him from releasing the video to the public, making me the sole owner of the only copy. My aim was not only to protect my wife, but also my daughters and myself from further embarrassment. The thought of a tape of my wife circulating on the internet was mortifying. I wanted to control the situation as much as possible before confronting my wife. From what I heard, the video is too explicit to even contemplate. That night, I was too drunk to drive, so I had to take a lift home and leave my car at the bar. When I got home, I could barely walk through the door. I remember calling my wife at 4:03 a.m. and then passing out. I wanted to confront her that night, but I was too intoxicated to handle it. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover on my couch, wrapped in a blanket. My wife was supposed to go to work that day, but she called in because she was concerned about my unusual behavior and wanted to figure out what was going on. She handed me a glass of water, and after taking a sip, she asked what was bothering me. As I looked at her, all the memories from the previous night came flooding back. I hadn't been this angry with her in a long time, and I needed answers. The images of her with those two dancers were all I could think about. I couldn't even find the words to speak. I just started sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't remember the last time I cried, and that was one of the lowest moments of my life. My wife seemed bewildered and started crying too. She tried to comfort me with a hug, but I pushed her away. At this point, she was getting frustrated and kept asking me what was happening. I finally told her that there was a video of her with two dancers at a bachelorette party 5 years ago. The look on her face was one of confusion, and then she started denying it, claiming it was fake. She insisted it couldn't be true, but I reminded her of which bachelorette party it was and asked if she was there. She admitted she was there, but vehemently denied cheating on me. She said it was all lies, but I suggested that perhaps she was too drunk to remember. She fired back that she would definitely remember something like that. She asked to see the video, and I told her the guy with the video was out of town. At this point, I really wanted to believe her. She seemed genuinely convinced that it wasn't her. I thought maybe it was a scam to extort $11,000 from me, but that amount didn't seem worth such a stunt. I desperately needed to see the video to confirm my wife's story. The guy messaged me that he'd be back in town on Tuesday, and today was Sunday, so I've been incredibly anxious. I can't stop thinking about that video. My wife has been acting strangely around the house, doing extra things as if she feels guilty. She keeps asking if I'm okay all the time, making it seem like I'm the crazy one or that I made up this whole story. Who would invent something like this? By Monday, my patience had run out. I told the guy we didn't need to meet in person right away. I could send him $11,000 through Cash App, and he could upload the video to Dropbox. He claimed he didn't have enough space on his Dropbox and couldn't delete anything to make room for the video. So I suggested he create a new Dropbox account, which he did. By Monday evening, I had transferred the money, and he sent me a link to the video. When I opened the link, my heart sank. The video started with a group of women, including my wife's friends, cheering as the dancers performed. Then I saw my wife touching the dancers inappropriately. The scene shifted to a dressing room, where my wife and 2 other women were on their knees preparing the dancers. There were about 5 men, if you get my drift. Then came the most gut-wrenching part. My wife, still partially clothed, was engaging in explicit acts with the dancers. The video was as graphic as I feared, and it was unmistakably her. Her voice, her mannerisms, everything confirmed it. This private moment, which should have been ours alone, had been shared with strangers. The dancers seemed aware they were being recorded, but didn't care. Whether my wife and her friends knew about the recording was unclear, because they never acknowledged the camera. My wife wasn't coerced into anything. She was seeking attention and even taking the lead. She gave herself to these men she just met that night, while I had to wait 2 months before our first intimate encounter. Now, everything I thought I knew about her was in question. In our current relationship, her closeness to me had always been significant, especially after our second daughter was born. Yet, here she was, eagerly engaging in acts with complete strangers without holding back. I needed to vent because I always believed there were special moments you share with someone you love, and it feels like that belief has shattered. This is seriously affecting my self-esteem, and the worst part is the nagging thought that I wasn't enough for her back then, and maybe I'm not enough for her now. I'm carrying a few extra pounds now, but back then, I was in good shape. I'd like to think I'm a good-looking guy, but despite that, she did this willingly. I'm curious if anyone else has experienced something like this, because it feels like I'm alone. Up until this video, my wife seemed perfect, a wonderful mother to our daughters, taking care of me, and not lazy like the unfaithful wives I've read about. She's very traditional now, although she wasn't when we started dating. That transformation makes it even harder to just walk away. Regarding protection, they did use it. Not that it changes much, but they were using protection, and she was so into it that she probably wouldn't have noticed if they weren't. I remember how adamant she was about using protection the first time we were intimate, which actually impressed me back then. This whole situation makes me question if our relationship has been a lie. Maybe I don't really know her. She swore the person in the video wasn't her before I showed it to her. If I hadn't seen it myself, I might have believed her. She was that convincing. Now I'm wondering what else I'm believing that isn't true. When she came home that evening, I connected the video to our TV so she could see it clearly. I admit, I was furious and went overboard. I thought she'd show remorse or beg for forgiveness, but instead, it seemed like she had prepared excuses. She claimed we weren't in an exclusive relationship at the time, and even said we weren't in a relationship at all. I fired back, even if she was right about us not being exclusive then. Though we both know she's lying, how is it ever normal to be intimate with 2 men at once? The person she has shown me all these years isn't the same as the one in the video. Then she changed her story again, saying she was drunk, and the alcohol made them take advantage of her. I pointed out that she was clearly a willing participant, and there was no resistance in the video. She countered by saying the video was doctored and didn't show the whole picture. She blamed alcohol, but she wasn't that drunk. Her motor skills were fine, and she wasn't slurring her words. She kept lying and making excuses. I didn't want to argue, but it felt like she was dodging full responsibility. She got upset with me for bringing it up, saying it shouldn't matter because we were just friends with benefits then, not in a committed relationship. She argued that it was in her past and asked how I'd feel if she held my past against me, saying she accepted me for who I was. She questioned why I couldn't do the same for her. We've never had a violent relationship and I had never thought about it. But her dodging responsibility brought me close. I didn't want to wake our kids and I couldn't stand being around her that night. So I packed some clothes and left to stay with a coworker because I didn't want to do something I'd regret, especially since I was on probation. Update: I packed some of my regular and work clothes and went to stay with a single friend who's also a coworker. My wife kept calling me, begging me to come home, but I ignored her calls. I knew I'd have to face the situation eventually, but I was too angry to be around her. She bombarded me with texts, accusing me of being unforgiving about her past while she had forgiven me for my time in prison, for aggravated assault and my 10 years of probation, which had held me back in life. I didn't go to college, but my wife did, and she works as a physical therapist. Even so, I earn more as a union electrician and by taking on additional profitable projects in the evenings. Our marriage started feeling like a joke, and I began to question who she really was. When I proposed, I wasn't under the illusion that I was marrying a saint. I knew everyone has a past, but this felt like too much. I thought she was just a typical party girl, and when I asked her how many guys she had been with, she said 5. That was clearly a lie, since the Bachelorette party added a significant number to her count. I knew about 3 of her past boyfriends and 2 short flings, but who knows how many more there were. Despite everything, part of me believed we had a solid relationship, but another part of me wondered what other lies she had told. I was deeply confused, and my life felt like it was unraveling. Staying with my friend wasn't a long-term solution because I had work projects to complete and deadlines to meet. My house also doubled as my storage and office for all my equipment, so hiding out indefinitely wasn't an option. 2 days later, I had to go back home because of my responsibilities as a dad and a looming contract deadline. Divorce or legal separation hadn't even crossed my mind yet. I was still trying to process everything. I felt deeply depressed, lost my appetite, and had a strong need to talk to someone. My dad has always been my go-to in times of trouble. When I was younger, I didn't often listen to his advice, which got me into a lot of trouble. But as I've gotten older, I've learned to heed his words more. So I called him and shared my situation. He was as surprised as I was. He never expected my wife to be that kind of woman, though he knew she had a troubled past, much like myself. My parents liked her because they thought she brought out the best in me and considered her a positive influence. She had a talent for showing them only what she wanted them to see. Most people wouldn't suspect a thing about her unless they were really close to her. My dad, married to my mom for 36 years, had some wisdom to share. He pointed out that things were different in their day. Women didn't have access to social media, which has changed how people seek validation and attention. Nowadays, women can attract attention from men all over the world through social media. This was something I found out more about when I checked my wife's social media accounts, but I'll get to that later. My dad advised me to return home and be a stable presence for the kids. He suggested listening to my wife without judgment to reduce her defensiveness and to consider reconciliation if she was willing to put in the effort. He emphasized that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and that another woman could deceive me just as easily. He acknowledged that it would be hard to forget what happened, and if forgiving her became too difficult, I should start considering alternative plans. After talking with my dad, I felt more determined to face the situation. When I went home to take my daughters to school, my wife wanted to talk privately. I told her we could talk later that night, and it seemed like she had been crying for hours. Honestly, I didn't feel much sympathy for her because she hadn't admitted to any wrongdoing. I received a text from the acquaintance, stating he had deleted the footage and no longer had it. I had to take his word for it, since I couldn't verify this. I also informed him I would be sending some legal papers as we had agreed. That evening, my wife was home when I returned. I was prepared for her to admit she had cheated on me, essentially confessing she had lied about who she was at the start of our relationship. She was on the balcony when I arrived, but looking at her felt like staring at a stranger. The image I had of her was shattered. I always thought I was the only one with a troubled past, but at least mine is out in the open, and I take responsibility for it. When I got home, she was sitting on the balcony. We usually spent time there in the summer because Massachusetts weather is pleasant then. She greeted me, but I didn't respond. I went inside, took a shower, and changed out of my work clothes. A few minutes later, I joined her on the balcony with a beer in hand. We sat in silence for a while. I wanted to see what she would say, what excuses she might come up with. She began by apologizing for her infidelity, saying it happened during a different phase of her life. She explained that when our relationship started, she wasn't sure it would last and was still in a partying phase doing things she now regrets. She expressed remorse and claimed she had been faithful to me since then. I interrupted her, asking why she had been intimate with those men the same night she met them, while I had to wait months for her to be close with me, even though she said she wasn't ready. Her response was that she wanted our first time to be special and meaningful, unlike her encounter with the dancers, which meant nothing to her. This explanation felt hollow to me. I brought up the fact that she had been intimate with them on the first day, questioning why I had to wait for a special occasion. It seemed like she was using closeness as a reward for me, while she had no problem engaging with strangers in explicit ways in front of her friends. I also asked if there were other affairs she had that weren't recorded. She denied it, but I couldn't believe her. She told me to check her phone and social media, insisting she was honest. I pointed out that if she had time to craft her story, she had time to delete any evidence. Although I didn't really expect to find anything, I took her up on the offer. She gave me her passwords, and after our talk, I felt she had partially admitted her wrongs. Still, I doubted she was being completely honest, and my trust in her was shattered. Despite this, I decided to follow my dad's advice and give our relationship another shot. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the same room as her, so I asked her to sleep in the guest room. The following day, I tried to resist the urge to check her social media, thinking she must have cleaned up anything incriminating. But I couldn't get it out of my head and found it hard to focus at work. Eventually, I gave in and went through her social media accounts, reading all her messages. This obsessive behavior was unhealthy, but I couldn't stop. Though she wasn't posting anything explicit, I was shocked by the number of guys messaging her. She was deleting these messages to hide them from me, as I had set up notifications, and messages would disappear before I could read them. I figured this was typical attention for attractive women, even those who weren't suggestive. Most messages came from men in the Middle East and South Asia, which I didn't find too concerning. A week passed, and our relationship remained tense. We were talking, but we hadn't been close since I discovered the affair. My wife was trying to reconnect, but she grew tired of my reluctance to move past it. She suggested marriage counseling because she couldn't handle my behavior anymore. I told her this wasn't something I could just talk away with a counselor. I wasn't sure our marriage could survive the affair, and my constant monitoring of her messages was wearing me down. So I decided to stop, even though it made me feel worse and trust her less. I started to feel like people were talking behind my back. Once, at a local bar with friends, I noticed acquaintances hanging out with the guy who sold me the video. They seemed to look at me and then turn away, like they were mocking me. I felt paranoid, but the video made it hard to shake the feeling that everyone was laughing at me. It was disheartening, leaving me depressed, ashamed, and angry. I felt disrespected, and the old me would have confronted them. But instead of causing a scene, I left the bar and went home early. 2 weeks after D-Day, I still hadn't been intimate with my wife. I was trying marriage counseling, struggling to move on and get close to her again. The affair was always on my mind. My wife set up counseling sessions, and we got a babysitter for the kids. Before our first session, I worried the therapist might blame me, but that wasn't the case. The therapist addressed my wife politely but directly. I won't detail everything, but it felt like an effort to make her be honest and rebuild my trust. More truths emerged, and my wife's reactions suggested there might be more incidents we didn't know about. I didn't feel she was telling the whole truth, and the therapist seemed to share my doubts. We were given techniques to rebuild trust, but I wasn't convinced reconciliation would work. My wife wanted to control what I knew. After our third session, she seemed to lose interest, feeling attacked. I learned things about her that shocked me, and she wasn't comfortable with this side of her personality coming out. She tried to switch therapists, but I refused. She made excuses to avoid sessions, sometimes canceling without telling me. It seemed she wasn't genuinely trying to take responsibility. 6 weeks after discovering the affair, I finally talked to the friend who told me about the video. I asked how many people knew about it. He said he was one of the last to find out. Many people we went to high school with, and most of his friends knew before him. He found it by accident. I also asked about the guys mocking me, and he confirmed they knew too. So I wasn't imagining things. It felt like everyone in town knew about the video, and I was the last to find out. That was deeply embarrassing for me. When I got home, I told my wife how deeply it bothered me that so many people had seen the video and that it might still be circulating online. She suggested we should move away from the area and said she was willing to change her job. It seemed like she had been thinking about relocating even before I found out about the video. I started to wonder if she had known about the rumors and the video before I did. Feeling uncertain, I thought it might be wise to contact some of the people in the video. Some were no longer friends with my wife, while others might still be loyal to her and not tell me the truth. Others had moved away entirely. I tried messaging them on Facebook, but so far, no one has responded. Update. It's been 3 months since D-Day, and I ended up being intimate with my wife again. She had been trying to seduce me around the house, and one night I gave in. It wasn't about love. It was more about frustration and desire. For the first time since discovering the video, she stayed in the master bedroom. The next night, she tried to initiate intimacy again, but I wasn't interested. Normally, I wouldn't refuse her, so she got frustrated. She was willing to do things I used to beg her for, but I just wasn't into it. When she tried to cuddle, it felt suffocating. I endured it for another night, then started sleeping on the couch because I couldn't sleep otherwise. The next day, she told me she hated seeing me suffer over nothing and suggested giving me a hall pass for a year. I told her that wouldn't change the fact that she wasn't the person I thought she was. Being with other women didn't interest me. I wanted something meaningful with someone I loved, but I didn't feel like I could get that from her anymore. 4 months in, I called my dad and said I didn't think I could forgive my wife and was considering legal separation. He suggested I move out for a couple of months to clear my head. When I got home, I told my wife I'd be looking for an apartment nearby so I could still see the kids. She begged me to stay, but my mind was made up. Update. A week later, I signed a month-to-month lease for a furnished studio apartment close to home. I had been second-guessing the separation, not wanting to leave my kids or wife. I tried to stay, but I felt a temporary break was necessary for my mental health. I didn't plan to move out permanently. I just needed time for myself. Plus, I still had keys to the house where I kept my work tools and equipment. The night before moving to my apartment, I had a huge argument with my wife. She accused me of being irrational, saying she had given me space throughout this whole ordeal. She claimed I had gone mad, leaving them over something she wasn't even sure happened while we were together. I told her we had discussed this before, and I believed she was still hiding things. I needed time to collect myself. She asked how long we'd be separated, and I said 2 months since most of my things were still at the house. We agreed to work towards reconciliation. After moving into my studio apartment, I felt a sense of relief. The first day was tough because my wife was very upset, even telling our 5-year-old daughter that I had abandoned them. Who says that to a 5-year-old? When I took my daughter to kindergarten and my 2-year-old to daycare, my daughter told me Mom had been crying and said Daddy had abandoned them. I reassured her that I hadn't abandoned them because I was still taking them to school. After dropping them off, I called my wife and told her she should be ashamed for manipulating our kids and lying about me. She refused to admit any wrongdoing, insisting I had abandoned them in her eyes. I reminded her the only difference was that I wasn't living there, but I was still fulfilling my duties as a father. The next day, I took my kids to school and daycare, and they seemed happy. After that, I went to work, then straight to a client's job site to finish some projects, and finally back to my apartment to rest. This became my daily routine. I avoided socializing because I didn't want to run into anyone who had seen the embarrassing video of my wife or face any more ridicule, so I kept to myself. My wife and I discussed relocating when we reconciled, but for now, I was too busy. I didn't see her for the rest of the week, but we talked on the phone regularly, mostly coordinating the kids' activities. Sometimes she even dropped off food at my apartment. It was a stress-free week with no arguments, no kids crying or demanding attention. It felt like a partial vacation. I even thought that once this was all over, I might move back into my house. I decided to take some time away from my wife and kids to clear my head. Some friends go on week-long hunting trips every season in places like Montana and Arkansas. There's one coming up next month, and I've been invited. I had always put it off because my wife found reasons why I shouldn't go, and I usually agreed. The prices can be high, but my buddy secured a group discount. The trip was a month away, but I had already bought my ticket. We'd travel in my buddy's RV, and it promised to be a lot of fun. It was something to look forward to during these tough times. The following weeks followed a similar routine. Midweek, my wife called saying the dishwasher had broken and asked me to come and fix it. When I arrived at the house to repair the dishwasher, I was taken aback by how different the living room looked. Usually, I only visited to pick up the kids from the driveway or grab my tools from the basement without entering the main living area. As I fixed the dishwasher, I noticed my wife had redecorated the living room with new curtains and a new couch. Curious, I asked her what prompted the changes. She simply said she wanted to refresh the space. After finishing the repair, I went to the master bedroom to gather some belongings and noticed she had bought a lot of new outfits. When I asked her about it, she mentioned she'd started going to the gym and was focusing on self-improvement. I couldn't help but feel a bit envious, wondering if these changes were her way of moving on without me. Even though I knew leaving was best for my peace of mind, I kept doubting my decision. 2 weeks later, as the weather turned colder, my wife informed me there was an issue with the furnace. I came over to fix it and noticed even more changes around the house. I hadn't seen her up close since the dishwasher repair, and when I did, she looked different, thinner, and more fit. She was always in baggy pajamas, so I hadn't noticed her weight loss before. She explained it was part of her self-improvement journey. During our conversation, I got the sense she wasn't too interested in me moving back. Why would she be? She had me handling the kids and the finances, still paying my share of the mortgage, while she enjoyed the benefits of having a man around without the responsibilities of cooking or intimacy. It seemed like she was getting the best of both worlds. I told my wife about my upcoming hunting trip to Montana, expecting her to object, say it was dangerous or expensive, but she didn't. She was surprisingly agreeable, which made me uneasy. I started to think maybe she had moved on and didn't care if I came back or not. That was the impression I got from her. 2 weeks later, I went on the hunting trip with my friends, returned a week later, and picked up my daughters for school that Monday. As I pulled into the driveway and opened the car door for them, they seemed thrilled to see me. But then, my 5-year-old asked if they were getting a new daddy, which struck me as an odd question. I reassured her that I wasn't going anywhere and asked why she thought they were getting a new daddy. She mentioned a guy named Michael who stayed at the house while I was away. Initially, I thought she might have mistaken him for my brother-in-law, but she knew him well enough not to confuse him with someone else. I even asked if she meant Uncle Daniel, but she insisted his name was Michael, a name I had never heard before. Since my wife had changed her passwords when I moved out, I couldn't check her social media or texts. The name Michael consumed my thoughts as I tried to recall if my wife had ever mentioned him before. I noticed she was no longer enthusiastic about reconciling and seemed content with me being around just to fix things. I started to assume the worst, that my daughter was telling the truth, and there was a man named Michael involved with my wife romantically. I decided to visit her that evening while the kids were asleep. I wanted to surprise her by showing up unannounced, but she didn't seem surprised, likely expecting me due to my recent out-of-town trips. Our relationship remained cordial, although the idea of reconciliation seemed to be losing steam. I still had keys to the house, so I let myself in. When she saw me, she asked if I was hungry, but I declined, expressing my desire to talk. We sat in the living room, and I confronted her straight away about Michael and why she was having an affair when we were supposed to be working on our relationship. I observed her body language closely. She nervously ran her fingers through her hair, a clear sign she knew she had been caught. Swiftly, she lifted her head and claimed Michael was just a co-worker who helped with household chores while I was away. I pressed her further, asking if this help extended to our bedroom. She gave me a strange look, and in a raised voice, I demanded an answer. She admitted they had slept together twice, but insisted there was nothing more to it. I didn't buy her story about it being just 2 times. I knew there was more to it. I asked her how long this had been going on. She initially tried to deflect by saying that if I hadn't left, this wouldn't have happened. I sensed she was avoiding the question, so I raised my voice again, demanding the truth. That's when she confessed they'd been emotionally involved for over a year, and it had recently turned physical. I reminded her that I had suspected something during our marriage counseling sessions, which was why she wanted to stop. The therapist had seen through her lies and wanted her to come clean. In hindsight, I realized I might have been deceived all along. I should have recognized that our relationship was built on shaky ground, since I didn't truly know who she was. I wondered how long their affair had been going on. From what I've read about infidelity, A woman who had multiple encounters at a bachelorette party wouldn't be satisfied with a simple, ordinary relationship like ours. I couldn't believe her claim that the physical affair only happened while I was away. I sensed there was much more to the story. I asked her how she thought we could reconcile when she had been involved with this guy for who knows how long. She didn't deny it, implying it was far more than just the 2 times she admitted. When I calmly asked if she loved him, she hesitated. Standing up from the couch, I told her it was time to stop playing games. A woman who had been intimate with dancers in front of friends wouldn't have done it just once. I told her I was glad she was happy with him, and that I now had solid reasons for a legal separation. I acknowledged that we had 2 wonderful daughters together, but it was time to end things. My doubts about moving out were now gone. I realized I had done the right thing by giving her the space to reveal her true self. Had I accepted her lies and gaslighting, I would have remained in the dark. Credit goes to our marriage therapist for opening my eyes, even if she didn't outright say my wife was lying. The therapist's pointed questions and my ability to read between the lines made it clear. It was like watching 2 liars dance around each other, and I was learning from the sidelines. My wife was adept at hiding her tracks, and I knew there was more she wasn't telling me. As I got up to leave, she said she still loved me, but I ignored her and walked out. That evening, I felt upset because I knew I wouldn't see my kids as often. There was no turning back, but I also felt relieved to finally see her for what she truly was. It's uncanny how true that saying about cheaters is. I'm not religious, but I slept well that night, feeling like the universe had aligned to reveal the truth. If my friend hadn't shown me the video, all these events wouldn't have unfolded to expose who I had been living with for 6 years. The next day, I called my dad to share everything. He reassured me that I handled things well and reminded me it wasn't my fault. He said everything happens for a reason, bringing hidden truths to light. My main concern now was my daughter's safety. I needed to know who this man my wife had introduced to them was. You hear about men who date single moms for sinister reasons, and I couldn't forgive myself if something happened to my girls. The next day, I picked up my kids from school as usual. My wife called to discuss our situation, insisting she still wanted to reconcile and promising to cut off contact with the other man. I reminded her that their relationship had been ongoing for years, so that wasn't the main issue anymore. She then tried to deflect, claiming their affair only became physical after I abandoned her and the kids. I saw this as a clear attempt to shift the blame, and I wasn't buying it. I pointed out that while we were supposed to be reconciling, she had brought another man into our home. I decided divorce was the right path and needed to focus on our daughters. She blamed me for giving up when I left, and I hung up to avoid further arguing. Despite her beauty, I knew she'd easily find another man, possibly even better than me. For my daughter's sake, I hoped she would. The worst scenario would be her having random men in the house, putting my daughters at risk. The next day, I reached out to one of her co-workers, who had been with her for 2 years. I called unexpectedly and pretended to need a male physical therapist, mentioning a recommendation for someone named Michael. She said she didn't know any Michael at their current workplace, but remembered a Michael from their previous job, who had been one of my wife's clients. I thanked her and hung up, realizing my question had been deceptive and she might tell my wife about it. I had to confront my wife about this Michael immediately. I called her and demanded the truth about Michael, pointing out he was a client for over 2 years, not just a coworker. She admitted he was a widower and a successful businessman who owned several hotels. She said he was trustworthy and they had chemistry, but couldn't pursue anything while she was married. When I left, she decided to give it a try. She tried to shift the blame onto me again, while admitting her fault in the same breath. After my call with her coworker, I was convinced my wife had been involved with Michael for a long time. I did a background check and found no criminal history, but I still felt envious of his success. I realized the importance of uncovering the full truth about my wife's affairs. It was crucial for me to start fresh. Some might suggest a DNA test for my daughters, but I don't see the need. They resemble me. 2 months later, we finalized our divorce, sold the house, and split the proceeds. My wife moved in with Michael, who owned multiple properties, though his main residence was 50 miles away. I relocated to a new city for a fresh start, found a better-paying job, and rented a condo with space for my work equipment. Adjusting to a new area and securing contracts was challenging, but I welcomed the opportunity. Although I missed taking my kids to daycare every day, We share custody, and I see them every other week. Life after divorce isn't as bad as I thought, and the custody arrangement gives me time to pursue my hobbies. I haven't started dating again, as I'm focused on work and don't see myself entering a long-term relationship anytime soon.